Hello and welcome to my kitchen. I want to talk about wool in this video. Different kinds of wool, different characteristics of wool according to my own understanding of what it is. I have made a list of characteristics that I will go through and explain it. The idea is that since wool has so many different characters, it is interesting and important, I believe, to understand them and to be able to classify it correctly. Obviously, we start with color. So you can see wool comes in many different colors. We have it white, we have it brown, we have it gray or black or brown or anything in between. There's nothing much to say about this other than colored wool is a lot more difficult to dye. So that is why most commercial breeds of sheep present white wool. Because this one will take the dye and you do not need to bleach it. Of course, that's something that people do anyways, but the main difference is between colored wool and white wool. So all of the most numerous breeds, they present white wool, whereas most of the heritage breeds present colored wool. Secondly, I want to talk about length. And as you can see, there is considerable variation in the length of the staple, as it is called. The staple being, so to speak, one lock of hair. If we were to separate it here, 1 second, there you go. That is one staple and compare it to this one. In the same amount of time, different breeds of sheep will produce more or less longer or shorter wool. So we have here 3 different breeds. We have a Norwegian spælsau, we have a Norwegian pelssau, and then we have a Norwegian crossbreed, or the white Norwegian sheep. So very big difference in length according to the breed and according to more or less the characteristics that we humans have bred into the wool and into our flocks. Basically, length is an issue, and we can say that commercial breeds tended to have a length of 7-10 centimeters. 7 is basically the shortest you can have, whereas something like this, which is a more ancient breed, or a different kind of breed, if you wish, has got something that approaches 25 to 30 centimeters in length. This is difficult to card in a worsted yarn carder, and that is therefore less interesting for the industry. Not to mention something like this. I mean, this is cardable, but it's still long. There you go. So not only length is important, but also it is important to remember that too much length can be an issue for the purposes of working with machines. Now, one of the most important parameters is composition. Composition of the wool. By composition of the wool, I intend the kinds of different hair that are present in the fleece. I have 2 kinds here in green and 2 kinds in red. Any sheep can have any of these. Often some breeds have all 4, some breeds have only 1, depending on what the breeding has been that we have been doing has been, depending on the use and depending on how precise one has been with their breeding. There's lots of things to say, but if we were to compare them, here we have our usual crossbreed, and here we have something very special, which is a Sway sheep. I hope I pronounced that correctly. It's a very ancient kind of sheep that is only found, or originally only found, on a tiny island off the coast of Scotland. And here we have our white spælsau. So the different names and the different kinds of hair, therefore, are wool hair, kemp hair, marrow hair, and dead hair. Wool hair being the very soft kind. This. The very soft and small in diameter hair that is also presents the best insulation properties. It generally, but not necessarily, tends to be the one that also is easier to spin due to other characteristics. So if we take a look at our soy sheep here, we can kind of separate the wool hair, and there it is. Probably very difficult to see on camera, but it's the very, very soft one. You almost can't see it, and it weighs very little, very, very tiny diameter, very soft to the touch. The same thing we can see here on a crossbreed. It's basically only composed of wool hair. We can see it's very soft, it's got a good length, and there's no rough hair whatsoever. Whereas here in a spell cell, we can see that the wool hair is here at the bottom, and there we go. Obviously you can see that they're all widely different, one from each other. Probably you can see it by comparison against my jumper here. But that is one of the components. Commercial breeds or merino, for example, they only present this kind of hair. Whereas, as we can see, heritage breeds or special breeds do have other hair. The second kind, CRIMP hair, is, for example, this. The really long hair that is also very strong. We can separate it from the rest in our spell sow example, and we can see it right here. This is a very strong kind of hair. If you were to really try, you couldn't break it. It's extremely strong, and it's right. And there you go. You can see it's a lot longer than the wool hair. So this is the wool hair, this is the CRIMP hair. This is really important for certain applications. For those that are interested in history, you can say this is absolutely important for the Viking ships. As part of my work, I've been doing some spinning of wool that goes into Viking ship sails that are being made now in Norway by enthusiasts and yeah, I can say scientists maybe. So this is very important to produce a very strong garment that will not that can sustain a lot of punishment. And that is one of the issues that you have with very soft breeds like that. This is very elastic due to the crimp. It's very nice, but it's not as strong as this. Nowadays people have grown away from this kind of wool. We don't really like it that much. We're used to this, so this is what you only find. Also, we have machines that can work this and not this, so the CRIMP hair is, especially when it's really long, is a bit of a special thing, so to speak. So these are the two green kinds of hair, the kinds that we want to have. But there are two more kinds, the marrow hair and the dead hair, and they are basically impossible to distinguish when you look at the fleece. You can kind of guess what is either of the two just by looking at the wool, because you can kind of pick them out and you can say, okay, this is probably a marrow hair. It's a lot thicker than the rest, and it's also not very strong. And this fact with the strength is really important for us, because if you were to separate it, if we take another sample here of our spelsa, which is an excellent example to see these different kinds of hair. Here we have CRIMP hair. I can remove some, and there you go. This is probably 50-50 marrow hair and dead hair. And if I were to roll it around, boom, it will just break like that. You can get, it's impossible to tell the difference unless you have a microscope to actually see the structure of the individual hair. It suffices to say that this is not something you want. So a big part of breeding, if you're breeding wool, is to find marrow hair or dead hair and eliminate it from your flock. It's difficult, but it is part of what breeding is. And you can have dead hair or marrow hair of either wool hair or CRIMP hair kind. So there you go, a good breed, like let's see this crossbreed commercial kind, does not present any marrow hair whatsoever. This is very important when you assess the quality of the fleece and therefore how much you can get paid for it. Because dead hair is useless. We don't need it, we don't want it. We can see, for example, in our Sway sheep, here, there is a lot of stuff that's going on. A lot of hair is really difficult to separate the different kinds of hair. We can't do it like that. There we go. This is probably mostly the CRIMP hair right there. We have the wool hair here, and then let's see, this is probably dead hair. There we go. Yes, that's it. So we have all three kinds. But this is an ancient breed with which I was reading a little bit about it, and probably it's as old as 5,000 years, and they have never been touched on their little island. So you can see this is probably what an original sheep might have looked like in the Stone Age, the kind of sheep that shed their wool in the spring and people would just pick it up off the ground, or if they could get close enough to the actual animal, comb it away. And then they would do what's called combing by taking the wool and then really separating all of the CRIMP hair on the one side and all of the wool hair on the one side, on the other side, and then they'd make different garments. If you know anything about the history of textiles, you'd know that, for example, in the Middle Ages, this was basically all people did with old kinds of breed of sheep. Then I want to talk about texture. And this may be a little bit misleading because it's my own denomination. I'm not really sure what the industry standard or what the industry name for it is. But I call it texture. And what I mean is the actual, how the hair actually looks up close. So if I were to draw it here, you can say that a strand of hair is actually made by tiny little plaques like that. There you go. So it has kind of little edges on its surface. These edges have two effects. One is they make it easy for other hair to hook onto it, like that. If we wanted to draw another one, there we go. You can kind of see why this would be the case. As you carve the wool and you put the hair fiber parallel in different directions, and they will hook and stick to each other like that. That is the first effect. And the second effect is what it looks like. So obviously, light that hits this very irregular surface will be refracted in many different directions, therefore giving a matte look. So that is, for example, the case with, again, our crossbreed type. The crossbreed has got a texture of the individual hair fiber that's pretty rough, like that, and is therefore easy to spin, easy to card, easy to spin, and does not look overly glossy. It has a little bit of gloss, obviously, you can see it, but the easier it is to spin, the less shiny it is. On the opposite end of the scale, we can take something like this, which is our Norwegian pelsesau, which is basically just a Norwegian variation of a Swedish pels sheep, or Gotland sheep, as they were used to know, as they were known before. And we can say this is a much less rough structure or rough surface of the hair. The result is it shines a lot more, so it's got a glossy appearance. But at the same time, this is really difficult to spin because the fibers are pretty straight like that. So it goes without saying that even if you get these fibers spun together, eventually they'll just slide away. So I know it from people that work at the wool mill. They know that this is difficult. You can do it. It's not impossible, but it will last less. This yarn will last less than yarn made from this. And so one of the things that they do is then to mix this thing with something else. So you'd mix it with a little bit of that. Probably you dye it first and then you mix it so that you kind of have something in between. And then you can make a yarn that actually holds. So glossiness or matte is quite important when it comes to judging the quality of the animal, especially for a breed such as this, where the main economical value is in actually producing a whole sheep skin. That's the case in Sweden and also in Norway. But if you wanted to make yarn out of this, you'd have to be pretty good at it, and you'd have to know exactly what you're doing. And you'd also have to know and be pretty aware of the fact that this does not last as long because of the fact that it's really glossy. Another parameter I want to talk about is crimp. And you can see very easily the difference between the two. I can put them close to my drawing. Here we have very high crimp, crossbreed. You can actually kind of match it, right? Or very low crimp. This is a gammelnorsk spelsel, which is an old kind of breed. Let's say a Viking breed, if you wish. I cannot tell you whether this grows faster than that. I'm not so sure, but one thing is for certain, this is very much more elastic than this. Goes without saying. As you stretch the fiber, the more bends it has, it will stretch longer. So for example, merino has very, very high crimp, and so does, for example, a Swedish fine wool, whereas this has very low crimp. I don't know, think of a Leicester, depending on what kind of Leicester you are used to. This is pretty straightforward, there isn't much to say about it. And then another very important parameter, the diameter of the hair. If you look at our little sample of gammelnorsk spelsel and we separate the wool hair from the camp hair, poof, we can see lots of wool hair on that one. We have camp hair here, and we have a bit of dead hair. Let me just remove it. There you go. That's all the dead hair we have. Really bad. Very, very bad. But what's the first thing that comes that is kind of clear to see is the diameter of this hair is a lot larger than this. So this is our wool hair, the warm, soft kind. This is our camp hair, the strong, long kind, very, extremely strong. This one has got a higher crimp than this, and you can actually see it. This is more elastic. It really stretches nicely. This one doesn't stretch basically at all. Generally, you can say that when wool is around 25 micrometers or less than 25 micrometers, it is called soft wool. That is because the hair will bend when it touches your skin. If it is anything larger in diameter than 25 micrometers, we call it strong wool, and probably many people will say, oh, it's itchy. The itchiness is given by the fact that the wool stands straight when it touches your skin and therefore pricks you in place. So we can see here, for example, in a very old breed like the gammelnorsk spel, it has soft wool as far as the wool hair is concerned, but the camp hair is strong wool. By comparison, we can look at this, which is our lamb of the Norwegian crossbreed type. This one is comparable to the wool hair of this individual, but still a bit stronger, still a bit longer, bigger in diameter. So I would guess This is 20 micrometers for the wool hair of the Gammal Norsk. We have around, I guess, 30, something like that, for the lamb of the Norwegian white commercial breed. And then our CRIMP hair is probably 40. This is also important to know when you are evaluating different individuals. And it is an issue for old breeds such as the Gammal Norsk, or for something that I can show you right now, which is a Swedish breed. This is a Swedish heritage breed that's called a Klövsjöfår. Don't try to pronounce it at home. And these are two samples, one from an adult individual and one from the lamb coming from the same individual. We can see same thing here as with the Gammal Norsk spare. Very coarse hair for the CRIMP hair of the adult individual. But the lamb has got quite thin, quite soft hair. So we can look at it and say, oh, this is quite soft wool, is it not? Whereas this one is basically strong wool. So that's an issue when it comes to breeding of these special breeds. This is basically what I work with most of the times, also with the wool project, but this is not going to give us a very nice soft yarn. It's excellent for a lot of applications, so there's nothing wrong with it, but if you wanted to make underwear, if you wanted to do that, you'd much rather do it with lamb wool than with adult wool. That is also why a farmer can expect 45 crowns for this, but only 5 for this, as the state of things is right now. So enough about the diameter. It's important, and it tells you how soft or strong wool. It's something that shearers will always say, soft wool is easier to shear than strong wool, but too soft wool can be a little bit of an issue, especially if it's soft and glossy. It will lay down under your comb, so then it's really difficult to get a good finish, but that's for shearers. Then I want to talk about density, and that is something that's really interesting to me. I mean by density the amount of hair per square centimeter. You can see this is our example of pelsesau, and this is our crossbreed here again. This is called open wool, and this one is called tight wool. If you know how a texel looks like, a texel is also got tight wool, because there is quite simply more hair growing per centimeter squared on their skin. Same thing with down breeds like an Oxford Down or a Shropshire, or I guess a baby doll as well, even though I've never seen one live. I just seen pictures. The tighter the wool, the more difficult it is to shear, as far as I'm concerned. The more open, the easier your comb will flow. The last parameter I want to talk about is wool wax, or lanolin, or wool grease, or many other names that you may know this from. And this is actually quite important. When you deliver a fleece, you want to have as little oxidized wool wax as possible. Why is that? Because wool wax that's oxidized is really difficult to wash away from the fleece, even for people with access to a professional scouring equipment, like in big wool mills and such. But one thing at a time. The components of wool wax are actually 3. You have wool grease, suint, I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, I've only read it, suint, and dirt. Dirt is also basically a part of it. It's also what the wool grease is there for. It's there to catch up the particles of dirt, among other things, and protect the wool and protect the hair and coat it and so on and so forth. But when you wash the wool, either you do it at home or you do it in a professional wool mill, what you are doing is you are trying to get rid of almost all of this. For spinning purposes, you still want a certain percentage of wool grease left in the fleece, otherwise the wool will be too dry. So there is a little bit of a percentage that's still left. But basically, you remove all of this from your raw wool because it can oxidize, and when it's oxidized, you can't remove it. It is a bit of an issue. It smells of sheep, for example. It gives you this oily feeling. It's actually really good for your hands because it's got very similar pH to your hands. But regardless, we wash it off. The interesting thing about this is these two different parts, the grease and the soot, are produced by two different glands that are present on the root on each and every one of the hair. So one is water soluble, the other one isn't. Therefore, the need when you wash wool to have basically two different solvents. It's very common to use what is essentially dishwashing soap, or not exactly, but you get the point, and soda. So you kind of have to change the pH of the water you're working with in order to separate the different parts. Industrial operations will make sure to gather as much of the wool grease as possible after it's been washed away from the fleece. And then they make all kinds of things. They refine it to lanolin or other options, other things. There's a whole list of applications, for example, in cosmetics or in medicines or treatment for cars, for example. They've made this anti-corrosion thing that you can spray on your car. Regardless, it's important to know that wool grease, soot and dirt are present in the wool fleece in extremely variable quantity. The amount of lanolin changes according to the time of the year, to the breed of the sheep, to the conditions that the sheep are in, and to the presence or not of lambs, to the feed. There are so many parameters that affect this. And for me as a shearer, it's really important to know about this because certain kinds of wool grease or wool wax will not melt at 50 degrees. They will melt at 70 degrees. That is the case for heritage breeds. Up here in Scandinavia, they have wool grease that only melts at 70 degrees. It's difficult to work with this. At the same time, something like this may have a melting point of around 40 or 50 degrees. So when you're shearing this in spring, up here when it's plus 10 degrees, if you're lucky inside, sometimes it's closer to 0, the lanolin will mostly be hard, and so it won't comb very well. In extreme cases, when it comes to this kind of wool, that is belly wool from a ewe, that I gathered this spring, you can actually see the flakes of oxidized hard wool wax. Can you see it? It's right there. This is not fun to shear whatsoever. Your handpiece cannot handle this. Your comb will not go through this. So it's really important that you who want to work with this know what the melting point of this lanolin is, and know when it is a good idea to attempt working with it and when it is not, and therefore choose the time of shearing appropriately. That's one of the things that's important to know about it. The second thing that's important to know about it is that when there is a lot of lanolin in the wool, as we can see, this is also a sample from, it's actually a full wool gammelnorsk spel, so it's a whole year growth. You can see the length of this thing. I mean, we're close to 40 centimeter. It's an adult animal, but as you see, it really, a lot of dirt is stuck to this, quite a lot, and it's the lanolin that's doing it. Sorry, the wool wax that's doing it, and it creates these little lumps at the end. The flakes that I was talking about is really oily to the touch, very difficult to shear, but also very difficult to wash away. So you can wash this twice in a professional washing machine and still have quite a lot left. And that is one of the issues with breeds such as these that have a lot of wool grease. And that is also one of the reasons why you get lower pay, because this is a lot more work to wash than this. Why do we have commercial breeds? Because they're easier to work with and they give us a more even result. So I hope that this video was of any use to you, and if you have any questions or you want to know something else, please do ask. What I know I will tell, and what I don't know I will make sure to find out. Likewise, if I've made any mistakes and you know better, please let me know. Thanks for watching and goodbye.